Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Life is a constant ebb and flow, a series of waves that carries us through both moments of calm and periods of tumultuous change. And social change, similar in its temperamental cadence, can bring about both opportunity and challenge. So in this episode, we'll explore the resilience it takes to ride these waves of social change and how in turn these experiences can help to build our personal resilience. And joining us today is Women and Gender Studies researcher Karen Graaff, who currently is situated at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. So welcome to the show, Karen. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to delve into this, especially with the social change that's happening at the moment. But before we begin, tell us about your background and what compelled you to pursue women and gender studies.
I spent many years working on men and masculinities. That was my background, mostly looking at violence and what socially kind of moves men towards using violence. I did my PhD research on gender-based violence interventions that were trying to prevent gender-based violence by working with men. They worked with men in different communities, men coming out of prisons. So I spent a lot of time looking at that. I was really interested in ways to try and, instead of framing it as something that people should have avoided once the violence had really happened to them, rather than looking at the people who had been perpetrating violent acts and trying to prevent those in advance. So I did many years of research on that. And then more recently, I've started looking at how surfing as an activity, but also as a community, can be used as a force for social change. And that was something I kind of got into just in the past sort of 4 to 5 years, which has been quite a nice change, looking at violence all the time. Something obviously I do in my own life, and it's nice to combine research and life sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And what has your research taught you about personal resilience?
I think for me, a big part of personal resilience is the community you're in and the people you have around you. I think a big part of being able to get through major changes or difficulties or even good changes is the support you have. I think it makes a really big difference to have people in your corner, people on your side who feel similar to you, or even if you have big disagreements, just are there when you need some help. I've seen how it makes a massive difference for people to have people around them who are doing the same thing, who are encouraging them, who are not pulling them down. I think that's been a big part of it. I've often seen, a lot of the workshops where they work with men, what helps a lot for men in trying to change behavior is having the group around them who are also trying to use different behaviors, because often broader communities can be quite resistant to change. So having peers who feel the same as you and are encouraging you, will be there when other people are perhaps quite negative about what you're doing. That can, I think that's for me one of the biggest differences.
Yeah, that's really well said. And it serves as an excellent preface for our topic for today. But before we go further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Karen? And my first question for you is, what books do you like to read?
I was worried about this question. I love to read. It is my favorite pastime. So as you can see, I have a big bookshelf behind me. I will read most things. At the moment, I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, which I know some people feel differently about, but I'm a huge fan. I think my favorite series ever is N.K. Jemisin, the Broken Earth series, which to me is one just the most perfect trilogies I've ever read. So I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi for now, but I will read pretty much anything. A lot of autobiographies and nonfiction. I do love novels. But yeah, pretty much whatever I can get my hands on.
Yeah, I find that sci-fi and fantasy are really nice to just experience some escapism and alleviate the stress of everyday life, of the harsh realities of the world. But what do you find compelling about that genre?
That is a big part of it. The escapism is very nice. I think the part that I also really like is that a lot of authors use it as a way to make really clever commentary on the society we live in. And I found that really interesting. And I also really like how authors can create a world that looks maybe better, not better is the wrong word, but different to one we live in. And it can often be quite aspirational. You have books where, queerness is just the norm and no one is treated badly for it. And, one of my favorite authors is Becky Chambers, and they write the most just beautiful, calm sci-fi, and it's cuddly and cozy, and it's, people in it, their main fight is just how to care better for each other. And I think that's so lovely as well, even if it's in space or on different planets and there's different species on spaceships. It's that community again, and that like wanting to be better for each other. I love it. I think it's called hope punk, and it's one of my favorite genres as well.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. And what about movies? Have there been any that you've enjoyed recently?
I am not a big movie person, to be honest. I have to limit what I watch because I get very invested. So I went through a long period watching all the Marvel movies, and that took up a lot of hours, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah, I know for sure. Like, there has been a point in my life where I was really invested in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that did me not a lot of good because I was just so into it that everywhere I went, I was seeing Marvel characters, and that just wasn't great for me. There's a duality for me when it comes to watching movies because I'm such a visual person that movies with the audio and the visual gets me so intensely invested in the movie, and I get how people want to experience the movie as much as possible. I need to experience less of it because I actually feel all of the feelings as if like I'm the one experiencing them. So yeah, I try to like watch a movie once in a while, but not too much either. And what about podcasts? Are there any that you like listening to?
Oh, also a big podcast person. Kind of fun ones that I enjoy. One is called Drunk Women Solving Crime, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The hosts have a guest and they pick a true crime story and they drink Prosecco while they solve it. And it just gets increasingly silly, but it is a very fun way to hear different stories. And the hosts are hilarious. And another is called The Bechtel Cast. So two American comedians look at movies through sort of an intersectional feminist lens to see the portrayal of women in them and kind of as a commentary on the portrayal of women in media in general. I've been listening to one called Upstream, which is around development economics. And that I found really interesting because it's not really my background. So there's a lot for me to learn, especially around sort of different ways of living and the ways that society could be set up. And that's been really useful for me just to kind of get a very different perspective to what I've heard as I'm going. Another really good one is called The End of Sport. And they focus a lot on college football in the US, and specifically how it's it is extremely harmful, and there's not really good reasons for it to exist as a sport. It is just harm, but it's a lot around the harms of sport in general and how we sort of gloss over those. And I found that quite interesting, applying it to surfing as well. But I found that a really interesting one. Yeah, I won't list all of them, but those four are in my head now.
Yeah, that's got a few picks, and I found the comedy ones really interesting because, sometimes whatever's going on in the world, it can feel very grim, especially if you're part of a marginalized community. And so, like applying some comedic aspect to it, while not taking away from the gravity of the situation, just helps people cope, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it is just nice to have just a good laugh at the same time that something is, you are learning something, but it's nice just to not, as you said, to sort of feel like something isn't always so dark and so heavy. And as you said, if you're in a marginalized group, it can feel pretty overwhelming. And sometimes nice just to have a little bit of a release that it is there, but it's also, there are other people like you who feel the same.
Yeah, 100%. And as for role models, who do you tend to look up to either in your professional life or your personal life?
I thought about this question a lot. One of the people that I've often looked up to, it's actually one of my best friends since we've been in high school, and they recently got married. But my friend is Dr. Linda Stupart. They're an artist and academic who live in the UK, and they are amazingly brave in the way they've been willing to take on very powerful institutions and push back on them, often with quite a lot of negative impact on their own life. And I've often found it really inspiring just to think because sometimes it's very scary to try and stand up for what you feel is important. And to have someone doing that in my close circle is often really inspiring. And at the same time, they're still very kind and gentle with the people around them and very loyal. And it's really powerful to me to have someone like that around me. So yeah, that's probably one of my biggest inspirations.
Oh, that is so sweet. I love that so much. And as for courses or classes that you've taken, have there been any that have stuck with you to this day?
I did a really interesting course probably 3 years ago now. It was called Becoming Fully Human. It's run by a South African NGO called the Kupanya Institute, which I'm not sure is still running workshops at the moment, but it was around working in institutions or groups that are socially progressive, but at the same time can still feel quite restrictive. So what it's like just to kind of manage being in those spaces. They talk a lot about like race and racism, which in South Africa, as in many places, but in South Africa has a very particular history. And I think in a lot of workspaces, including, civil society spaces, academic spaces, there's a lot of unmentioned racism and sexism and homophobia, and what it feels like to be in a space that is outwardly very progressive, but can feel quite harsh. So that was a really powerful course to go through and really useful conversations to have again around racism and, what it means to be a white woman in South Africa with all of that kind of history, and just to be more aware of what is happening. So that was a really good one I did recently.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and it's pretty accurate. It's a pretty accurate reflection of what does happen in reality, because I do notice that there's a lot of infighting amongst even marginalized groups, and while some of it, like some of the points, are very necessary to talk about, it can escalate pretty quickly, and sometimes. Some of the things said aren't necessarily productive or constructive, and I myself have had to unpack that and figure out for myself what I think is constructive to say or to internalize. Yeah, so that's a really interesting one, and thank you for sharing that. I feel like I got to know you a bit better, so now let's jump right into the interview and discuss what it means to ride the waves of social change and what that can do for our personal resilience. But for starters, I would love to get your definition on personal resilience. What do you think it means?
For me, personal resilience is, I guess, just the capacity to survive what is happening. And I think for me, it's really important to acknowledge that it doesn't have to look pretty or good. It will probably be difficult and messy and potentially quite ugly, and it won't always leave you feeling very powerful at the end. It can be, things can, leave you feeling really, really down. But I think it is just the capacity to get through and come out the other side in whatever way you can.
Yeah. And what about social change? What is your definition of that?
That is any sort of movement towards or shift in social norms, behaviors in a broader community. So not within a single person, but within a community, within a country. It can be, that's often quite a slow process. It can be, a shift in how people think and talk about different people, different groups. It can happen in very surprising ways, I think, through different types of media. Often there'll be a big sort of focus point that shifts the way people talk about something and think about it. But just sort of shifts in social norms is what I call it.
Yeah. And how would you describe the relationship between personal resilience and social change or adversity?
So I think social change can be a good and a bad thing. Often, it's interesting when you sent me the list of questions. For me, social change is often framed as something good. And I think because a lot of the groups I spend time with and the work I do, we're pushing for social change, for things to be different to what they are. And I had to think a bit about the fact that it can be, for example, in the US right now, there's a lot of social change and it feels like it's not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, personal resilience is around surviving to get through and either to get to the point where you see the change you wanted and that you were pushing for, or to fight against change that is harmful or difficult to keep moving forward. And again, sometimes that is going to mean, lying on your couch and just surviving the day, because I think life is hard and tiring and it is draining just to get through a work day and then still feel like you need to care about issues outside of yourself, your family, your own sort of small space, and to take as much, again, support and comfort as you can when it's there, and to do the bits that you can, that you feel up to doing. I think it's showing up in a way that feels manageable, even if it's just in your own very small space within your own home with your family. If you can keep showing up in that space, moving through, and obviously for some people their home is not with their family, it's with friends or with other people, but it's just whichever space you can work in and work on. I saw a really lovely quote the other day, and I'm going to butcher it. It's from a US poet called Hanif Abdurraqib, and he was saying, find the smallest space you can decently work on and do that. And it's finding, just, you don't have to be going for, country level change, legal change, legislation. It can be in a really small space. It can be in your home. It can be in, a group that you spend time in. If you are, in gaming or sports or whatever, you'll obviously be in smaller communities, and those can be really important places to get support, but also start having conversations around what's important to you.
Yeah, a little bit goes a long way, and facing the world, or I suppose trying to enact that change outside of your comfort zone can be really scary, and it's okay to start small, right? And I'm really curious to know from your research and all the work that you've done, from what you've of from what you've observed, how do factors like privilege and marginalization influence one's ability to effectively practice resilience and respond to social change?
I think that makes a huge, huge difference. I think privilege, in whatever form you have it, whether it's whether it's wealth, whether you're coming from a privileged group, you just have fewer things coming at you on a daily basis. And that's not to say everyone's life is great and easy if you are in that position, but you just have fewer obstacles. And I think that definitely gives you more space to, not just be worrying about survival day to day. So if you're not worried in your daily life moving down the street to avoid violence or heckling or, public abuse, you have more energy to do everything else that is important. And whether that's just keeping yourself going or pushing for social change, I think that is a massive, massive asset to have. And that's not to say that everyone should be doing, frontline work. I think if you are someone in a privileged body, so if you are someone who is white and able-bodied and you are someone who is traditionally seen as not threatening, you could be someone who puts yourself in the front line in between people who are more marginalized and positions of authority. But it also could be that you are able to financially support groups. So I think that privilege really does give you a lot of options and more ways to protect both yourself and others. And I think being in a marginalized identity, it really just pulls back in a lot of those. I think it gives you probably a better awareness of what is happening in the world often. I think privilege can also give you blinkers and leave you thinking things are fine because you're fine. Or even not even fine, but you are not facing, daily debates on whether or not you should be allowed to exist or have the life you want it to be. And so I think it's a lot of just drain on your energy and time and safety and a lot of extra things to think about. So I think it does have a big draw on your resilience. And again, I think that's where, for me, it's really important to have people around you who can support you. So you don't have to do everything on your own. That's not, for me, what resilience is. It's survival in whatever form that takes. But if you have people around you, to lean on them if you can and to provide support as well. I think often being able to support someone else is also something to help you be more resilient. And it doesn't mean you have to be giving of yourself constantly and only providing support, but it can be really powerful just to see that you can make a change in whatever person's life, to drop off a meal if that's something that's easy for you, to give people lifts, to listen when someone's talking. There's a whole range of ways that being the support can also be a really powerful form of resilience because you are bolstering yourself while you're helping others. So I think your identity plays a massive role, and in some countries more than others, depending on, legal situations and what the kind of national conversation is at the time. So again, I think in the US at the moment, it's quite a scary place to be if you are any kind of marginalized group. But that's true in a lot of places. There's a big push towards, the right in a lot of Europe, parts of Africa. I don't know loads about political situations in a lot of Asia, so I don't want to sort of make big statements, but I know there's a lot of places where it can feel harder for a while. And I think, again, that's when when your daily life sort of feels like it's being debated by people, that feels really draining. And then it's more important than ever to have people around you and to, as much as you can, put back into those spaces.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. From personal experience, I go through phases where I'm a little bit more closed off and don't socialize as much because, for whatever reason, might be tired from work or just tired in general. And then I have phases where I do go out and socialize a little bit more, and I do have these conversations with my friends or peers. And I've always found it to be really cathartic. And it just really helps to have, oddly, it does sound odd, but it does help to have those notions and ideas kind of bounce back to you, if that makes sense. Like just hearing that you're not alone in having this opinion, not to say like that you're being in a bubble or anything like that. I feel like now more than ever it is easier to not live in a bubble because of social media, and we are able to see much more varied opinions. So having that community of like-minded people isn't necessarily, in my opinion, living in a bubble. It's like you said, just getting support. But conversely, I was wondering, what have you observed about how facing social adversity or change can impact our resilience?
Again, I think every bit of adversity you're facing is a little bit of a draw on your energy. And I think your energy really contributes to your resilience. So I think the more you're facing in your daily life, in media, even if you are quite sheltered just in your own space, but just knowing that it's happening around you, it's all just it's a extra pull. And again, I mean, life is hard. It's hard to work long hours to try and, make rent and be able to feed yourself and your family and people around you, and to have just kind of a standard of living that's manageable, because it's, life is hard and expensive and tiring. And I think all of that really does draw on you. And if you have additional things, people with different able bodies, with neurodivergences, with visibly non-conforming bodies and mannerisms, I think that is a constant draw. I think the world is very much set up for certain bodies and brains and ways of speaking and being. And I think if you don't align with that, you get reminded of that very often. And that is, again, just a constant sort of pull on your energy and your time, and that really impacts on your resilience, your capacity to keep going and think of ways through. I think also, resilience can also be a bit of imagination, just thinking and imagining that there could be something different. And sometimes if you are constantly facing a lot of difficulty, it can be difficult to think that it could be different and there's another option. So like you're saying at the start, sci-fi and fantasy, even that can just be a really nice way of reminding yourself that it doesn't have to be the way it is now, that there are other options, and it might not be something that happens easily or quickly, but it's there. It either has been there or could be there. Nothing that is set up as it is now is necessarily unchangeable. I think we like to, not like, but I think it's very easy to slip into the idea that the way things are now is forever and it cannot be different and people will always behave this way. And that's not true. People have behaved so differently at different times in history, in different places. Behavioral norms are different. Yeah, but I do think it's tiring, and being tired makes it harder to be resilient. It's that time where, normally you would move through a day quite easily. And then sometimes, you go shopping for groceries and you just want to cry because it's hard and it's loud and it's too many options and things are expensive and it's just the last thing you really want to do. And other days that will feel easy. And so I think, I'm someone who's had quite a lot of experience with burnout. And there are days when the thought of making a sandwich is very, very hard. And other days it's something I don't even have to think about. And so, I think it really impacts on your capacity to just get yourself through.
Yeah. And what is your advice for managing these obstacles, like experiencing burnout and and the emotional exhaustion from facing this adversity?
That's the difficult one, because I think for some people, there's not much in their life that they have control over to make easier. So again, I mean, if you are in a situation where you work a job that is just covering your basics, it's very difficult to have time to yourself just to relax, because maybe you are working more than one job. If you're a freelancer, you're constantly having to take extra gigs just to cover costs. So I don't want to kind of make it sound like, oh, just like take time for yourself. It's so easy, because for some people that isn't an option. If you have kids or a family, if you are looking after people in your home, it can be really difficult to have any time for yourself or time to recharge. It's time to sit behind a closed door and have 5 or 10 minutes. If that's something that is recharging for you, I think in whatever capacity you can, the things that give you energy, to try and do those. And for some people, for me, it's really important to have time on my own, to have some quiet time, to read, to watch a series that doesn't need much thinking. For other people, time spent in a group, as you mentioned, time with people who feel the same as you, who care about you, that can be really, that can give you a lot of energy again. But whatever is, the easiest thing that you can fit into your day, or not even a day, it's hard to do it every single day, but that you can fit into your life that isn't going to feel like an extra drain, so you're not sort of feeling like, if I'm not going to yoga every time, then I'm not even doing self-care right, just to be able to, be kind to yourself. And when there are opportunities that you can take to have a bit of a break, maybe if you're at work, you can, I don't know, if you are given the opportunity just to have 5 minutes to have a cup of tea or coffee and not be at your desk, to walk away from something. If you're in, a front-facing role, to have someone cover for 5 minutes while you just go sit in the back, whatever you can kind of carve out. And the thing that gives you a bit of extra energy, maybe it is a podcast, maybe it's an audiobook or reading a book or listening to music or, looking at a skyline, if you have that as an option. I think, and I say this as someone who has spent most of my life living in coastal cities, for me, being close to a body of water really, really helps. And, it is part of my love of surfing, is that time in the ocean feels very regenerative. It gives you energy. It just gives you a bit of a break in everything else that's happening. And that's not true for everyone. If you have that option, if you have a park or even just something close by, if you have a pot plant that you can keep alive, just something kind of alive and natural, and that's not, and if having pot plants feels like an extra drain on you, because I can also understand that. If you can keep it alive, wonderful. If you can't, I do not judge.
Yeah, mine would be touching my cat. He has very silky, soft fur, so that's always nice to touch. But he equally gives me the same amount of anxiety. Like, as much as I get relief from stroking him, I also get a lot of anxiety from his random misbehaviors. But
bet,
it pot plants, or don't get me started on that. Can't keep a pot plant to save my life. But yeah, I agree with you there on, like, just embracing the simplest things in life, with, like, sometimes it might be just sitting at the park or looking into the sky. Sometimes I do have like really like a pretty small window in my apartment, and not much sunlight gets through it, but sometimes I can see just the littlest bit of the sunset, and I'll just stare at it for like a minute or two, and that kind of, I wouldn't say that makes me brand new or anything like that, but it clears your mind for a little bit. So yeah, definitely am with you there. But I'm also really curious to know, historically, what are some examples of um, how communities or groups have successfully adapted to social change? I don't want to say successfully, because it's pretty subjective, right? What is successful? But yeah, what are some examples or case studies of how communities have adapted to social change?
I think we are always adapting to social change, to be honest. I think that is one of the constants in our lives. Things are changing all the time. I don't know a lot about if there have been studies on how communities have done it. I think we don't always want the social change that's happening. So I think there can be times when the way communities deal with it is to try and push back against it, to try and stop it. But I think we don't have the choice to not adapt. I think that is something we just are going to be going through at all times. And so I think if you are trying to resist, I think this can be a bit two-sided. I think trying to resist change is going to leave you very tired and run down, because, again, it is the thing that is going to happen whether you like it or not. And at the same time, there are times when the change that is happening is something that needs to be pushed back against. So we don't always have to go with change just because it's happening. Again, if you think that the change that's coming is something you feel strongly is not a good thing, you absolutely should push back against it. And, obviously I have my ideas of what is the change I'd like to see. People have very different ideas. But, it's not that you are passively watching everything happening around you. But again, I think that the idea that you wouldn't adapt is going to leave you very, very far behind. I say this as someone who is very nervous of technology. I struggle to update everything. I would prefer to keep everything as old as possible. And that is not an option I have. You just have to go with it. And I know people feel very strongly about different types of technology. You don't always have to be the first person in line for everything. But to think that you could keep going without switching to new things, some things will slide by and you don't necessarily need to get into it. But the way that we work and move and communicate and live our lives is so different now to what it was 20 or 50 or 100 years ago. That's a big social change. Fridges were a social change at one stage. And to think that you would not need to catch up at some point is going to leave you, I think, pretty left out. So I, against all my wishes, have to keep updating my technology. And I fight it every time, but it has to happen. And I have to learn all these new programs and apps and everything else. And I am terrible at it, but it has to happen. And I can fight that. And I can have feelings about the way we use technology now. And, we don't have to get into the whole thing around AI, but that is a very specific type of technology that people have feelings about. And yeah, I think the constant is having to adapt to things being very different to how they were when we were young, when people we know were young, when our parents were young. Yeah, that is just the thing we have to adapt to every day, all the time, basically.
Yeah, I think I understand exactly what you mean. I have been I'd say I'm pretty I'm pretty well informed and updated on technology, but I do have my reservations about AI, especially ethically and environmentally, with how how huge of amounts of data and energy that they actually use that we don't see. And I've kind of accepted that most of the world is just going to continue using AI, but I I won't really exhaust all my efforts to, I guess, yelling this on online for the whole world to hear, because I am not ready for backlash. And I have accepted that, like, I can't post something online and expect to not receive negativity. I like, if I'm going to put myself out there and say something, I will have to accept that I may receive that, and I will have to receive it reasonably well, or it will just eat up my mental health. So I choose to avoid that. But what I try to do is just just let people know this is what is happening with AI. And it's not to say, like, don't use AI ever. I think there are some good applications for AI, but, like, just try to be more conscious that when you're using AI, it's not just a cute little Google search. You know what I mean? And I have seen a couple of my friends and peers already kind of change their habits when it comes to using AI. So some little example of how small little efforts go some way.
Yeah. And again, you don't have to be the person changing the public's mind. You don't have to be the one doing all of that work, even if, as you said, it's something you talk to your friends about. And I mean, I think something we forget pretty often is, as important as personal resilience is, it's really hard to live ethically. And I mean that in all senses of the word, but including environmentally, in the society as it's set up right now. We don't have very good options. So I think trying to live perfectly and in a way that is not at all damaging to the environment, the way society is currently set up, that is not really possible. You can make the decisions to be as, limit your impact as much as possible. But I think we also sometimes get a bit into the spiral of thinking, if it's not perfect, let me just not try it all. And I think the bits that you can do are great. And if there are things, a small example, when we were talking about plastic straws, and there was that big push, and David Attenborough was, plastic straws are the worst. And so everyone got rid of plastic straws, which, great. It's not the biggest polluter by a long way. You still have oil companies. And for a lot of people, straws are an accessibility need. They can't take in liquids without it because they have hands that don't work or arms that won't work as well. They maybe don't have that. And so suddenly it becomes this personal thing of, if you use a straw, you are destroying the environment. And that is absolutely not the case. Big corporations are destroying the environment. Your use of a straw is not the biggest thing. But again, it is something. And I think it can be very easy to sort of pick up on the small little bits and, act like that's the biggest thing one way or the other. And I think it's important also to keep a bit of perspective in that your individual shifts, yes, will help, but also it's not the only thing. And I think, you can make the decisions that make you feel more comfortable with the way you live. But realistically, it is really, really hard to live a perfectly ethical life in the way life is set up at the moment. You do the best you can. And I think that's the important part, is to do the best that you can for what feels manageable.
Yeah. One way I like to think about it is, this is going to sound like it's quite far of a stretch, but hear me out here. The way I like to think about it is that, it is very common business practice to put out a product that's imperfect, and then revise the iterations later on. So I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be perfect like right now.
The iPhone wasn't perfect at the number one. So.
Absolutely not. If I am spending all of this money on imperfect iterations from products, I don't have to be perfect either, at least not right now.
I love that. That's great. And let's be honest, no product ever becomes perfect. It is progress, not perfection. I think that's the best framing. I love it.
Yeah, 100%. All right. I think that we've covered quite a lot about our topic for the day. So let's move on to some of the daily practical application of what we have just talked about. So what habits or exercises would you recommend practicing to strengthen our personal resilience, especially through social adversity?
So I can talk for what works for me, and obviously if whatever works for other people is what they should try. Time just quiet and having a bit of a break. I really like being in the ocean. If that's an option for you and it's safe and it's accessible, that is really lovely for me. I know it's not for a lot of people. It's very water can be very containing. And again, I say this as someone who's always lived at the coast, and I've been able to swim for a long time. So it's not inherently risky all the time. Obviously, the ocean is always risky, but if that's something that feels safe for you, I think if you have something that feels important, that's bigger than you, and whatever that might mean for you, if it's religion, if it's spirituality, if it's whatever that does mean, lean on that as much as you can in ways that feel nurturing for you. I started doing TRE, which is sort of a trauma release, and that's been really powerful. And it's 10 minutes every 3 or 4 days that I can just do at home. And I found that to just be a really, if nothing else, just a really nice time to lie down on my yoga mat for 10 minutes and have that break, but also that it kind of getting in touch with my own body a bit better, which is something I've struggled with a lot, to, just sort of be in myself and to take energy from that. There's quite a nice practice at the start where you sort of spend a few minutes resourcing. You look around and see if there's 1 or 2 things that feel like they can support you at that time. And if it's that out your window, you can see a tree or a little bit of sunlight sometimes. If your cat is something that gives you energy, that just notice that is there with you, and that there are things around you that can help support you instead of always being the drain. And I think that can be a really useful thing. And I think it helps to keep in mind, the things that are there to help. I think, again, it can be really easy to get caught up in how hard everything is. And I think to spend some time looking around and, seeing what is around you that can help. And I really very strongly believe in, the power of a community and people who will be there when something happens. And they don't have to be the ones who will, drive you to hospital if something goes bad, but just it's the ones who will answer a message or send you something funny when you need it, or, when you have a conversation, you will have things in common to, I organized a queer surf group once a month, and we had quite a big group on Sunday, and it was so lovely. And as we were paddling out, one of the people who'd never surfed before turned to me and just said, "This is just paddling out like this has made my 2025. And it was just such a small thing, which for some people they do every day and it doesn't cross their mind. But for that person, it was huge. And I just loved it. And I was so, and I was managing a big group of 20 people, which not my strong point. And it was so great. At the end of the day, I came home and I just thought, oh, it was so lovely to see people enjoying a space that is really important to me and feeling safe, and that it was somewhere that could be for them as well. And that was amazing. So I think, again, just sort of keeping an awareness of what is around you, and not only the difficult things around you, because that can often be very loud and take a lot of your energy and focus.
Yeah, I love that. Similar to the person that you were mentioning, I did go stand up paddleboarding once, like last year, and it was such a reinvigorating experience. Like, I didn't ever go back again because I live really far from the ocean, so like I find it very difficult to find the time to go there. But yeah, it was really, really fun. I'm also curious, have you ever struggled to find time to do these habits and exercises? And how did you get through that?
Oh, absolutely. Life keeps going, even if you need a break. And it's very easy to get caught up in everything that's happening around you. I was working for a while on a research project that had me working, 7 days a week. I worked for 42 days straight at one stage. And to forget that that's not the only thing. And again, not everyone is in a space where they can easily step back from that. If you are in a role where, if you are a doctor who's on call, it's going to be very difficult to take time for yourself if you just don't have that. But yeah, it's really easy to get caught up. And sometimes sometimes it helps if someone either around you can say, maybe now is the time to have a bit of a breather. Or often your body will tell you, I get sick. My body will just be like, we are done. Now we need to stop and have a few days. Just even if it's 4 or 5 days, you need to stop. So sometimes you don't get the choice. And, sometimes you recover from that or don't. So I think that's the balance of trying to find, just stop before that. But it can be hard. And I think there's a really strong push to keep going at all costs, and always be doing more and busy and hustling. And so I think for me, it's often been that I tend to get sick and I am then forced to take time, and then I have to reflect and what have I done to get here, and what are things I can change to do it differently. And in that research project, the choice I had to make was actually stepping away because I just couldn't manage the demand of it. And sometimes it's, if you are in a position, just say, can I take some time off? Can I adjust my role a bit? Or, just to have a way that makes it something you can live with long term, because often I think we think a stressful situation will be short. I always think it'll be a few days and then it's done. And it is not a few days, it keeps going. And I then had to spend some time recovering, and recovering is slow and you want it to be over fast. And it's, often I've taken quite a long time to feel physically better. And then from that to feel emotionally and psychologically and just energy wise better again as well. So it's a lesson I keep thinking I have learned, and then I learn it all over again. And always not when I would choose to have that lesson, but you just don't get to make that decision for yourself, do you?
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. I do get sick a lot myself, and I end up, get the job that I have is objectively not that demanding compared to a lot of other jobs out there. But as a perfectionist, and trying to be less perfectionist and failing all the time, I yeah, I constantly find myself in that cycle as well. But I love what you've shared with us, and I think it's really helpful for people to know that it's okay to get sick and let your body tell you it's time to stop sometimes. And yeah, so thank you very much for joining us today. It's been such an enlightening episode. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you've shared some really interesting insights with us as well. So now let's move on to the open mic segment, and that will be your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to this topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away, Karen.
Ooh. I think because we had that event on the weekend, that surf event is really sitting in my mind as something that, it felt really powerful. And it's the end of Pride Month in South Africa, and it was a busy month with a lot of events. And that was really lovely, seeing people being out in community and feeling safe enough to come out and be in public spaces, which isn't always true. And it felt so lovely just to be in spaces where people were enjoying themselves and being sometimes over the top and sometimes not, and whichever form of themselves turned up, that being okay. And I think just that, like, I talk a lot about embodiment and just that feeling of being in your body and how amazing our bodies are, because they can do so much. And not, we're not all endurance athletes or, Olympians or anything like that, but just the things that our bodies can do, even when we are very limited, I think it's amazing. And I love seeing examples of that. And someone ran a yoga session, and it was really lovely seeing the huge range of bodies there, and people who had a lot of mobility and flexibility, and people who had very, very little, and there's space for all of that. And it was lovely and safe and supportive, and that felt really nice. And again, the surf day was really powerful for me. It felt so nice seeing a big group in the water together, people who felt safe, and even people who absolutely hated the surfing, but they tried something new and they met new people. Some people hate the beach and they came anyway just to sort of be there. And that, it's just, I'm still smiling, and it's 4 days ago still, and I loved it. And it's not something I can do often because it's a lot of work and it's very tiring. But that felt really, so nice for me. And I've been thinking a lot about that over the past few days, just kind of at the end of that month and after that event, that it's, just people getting to choose the ways they show up and the things that are important and powerful for them. And it's been really nice to see a huge range of that over the past few weeks. So that's been one of the events we went to was a book quiz, and my team won, and we got free books, and it was such a fun surprise in the middle of a week. And just all these events that just turned out to be really nice and kind. And that, I think, is a big thing for me. It's just all the ways you could sort of look after yourself and be kind. And that can mean a lot of things. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's such a heartening experience to share with us. And it does remind me that, it's a community. It reminds me that sometimes, it may be inconvenient, like in the nicest way possible. It can be inconvenient to, like, let's say, go to the beach, or like pack a surfboard, or hire a surfboard, or learn surfing. But that's the price you pay for community, and that's really important to have. So thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing all of that with us. I've really enjoyed my time. If our listeners if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Probably best places. Most of my social media is private because, as you said, there are consequences to being online. My academic work is easy to find if you just Google. If people can't access it, because sometimes it is behind a paywall, you're welcome to contact me. I will always send free versions because I would prefer people to read it than have to pay a journal publisher. So do a Google of my name, then you'll find my academic work. I do have a podcast, which is very sporadic, which I do with a colleague around surfing as a tool for social change. It's called the Deep Duck Dive podcast. That's on Instagram. I think it's the Deep Duck Dive podcast. We've got a website. It's on Spotify and Apple Music. That's quite fun, which when we get around to doing it, we have a good chat. Yeah, the Queer Surf group is Queer Surf Cape Town on Instagram if people want to join that. Yeah, those are the public ones that I've got.
Excellent. We'll link those in the show notes so everyone can access it. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.